Kelly Anderson was in a whole different world, as she cheated on her husband with another man and had more fun than when she made love to her husband. In fact, Kelly wasn't even sure why she was doing this. Things had been great between her and Kurt. He always treated her like a queen, doted on her, bought her presents and flowers on a whim, just to say, "I love you." And the love between them was good, even though it had dropped off a bit lately. They had 2 wonderful children, and things were, in general, great. But for some strange reason, she decided to give herself to Scott. Maybe it was the months he spent in the office seducing her with his compliments and the sly glances he gave her. Maybe it was the thrill of doing something behind her husband's back. Or perhaps it was the gossip she heard about his giant from the other girls in the office. Perhaps it was all of the above. At first she was worried about how it might affect her marriage and family, but all that went away when he gave her unforgettable pleasure for the evening. Naturally, she gave him the same pleasure in return, and then the main course began. Right now, all she cared about was getting as much of this man as she could in the short time they would spend together, even if it meant getting pregnant by him. By now, all thoughts of Kurt had left her mind. There was no more guilt, only the need to get another pleasure. She would make it up to her ignorant husband, she thought. Maybe she would even teach him to do what Scott had done to her. Eventually, Scott, the man who was now making love to her senseless on the bed in the cheap motel room, sending her to the pinnacle of mind-blowing pleasure. He collapsed on the bed beside her, and the 2 lovers fell asleep in each other's arms, promising each other to repeat the performance. She woke up and glanced at the clock on the nightstand next to her. The clock read 8:30, which gave her plenty of time to clean up and get home. She told Kurt she would be working late but would be home by 10:30 at the latest. The motel was only a half hour from her house, so she had plenty of time to clean up and get home to her husband. She looked at the other side of the bed and noticed Scott had already left. She didn't recall him leaving and thought it odd he would go home to his wife without saying anything to her. She decided to give him a piece of her mind when she saw him at work the next day. She also noticed that his side of the bed looked as though no one had ever been there. Strange, she thought, but decided that he was probably as neat as he was talented. She went into the bathroom, inspected herself, and noticed that other than a bit of puffiness between her legs, Scott had left her free of any telltale marks. That was good, she thought, as she didn't want to explain any strange bruises or marks on her body. She showered, using 2 spritzers to clean herself as best she could. She didn't want to take any chances, at least not yet. After thoroughly inspecting herself, she put her work clothes back on and prepared to leave, once again taking a quick glance around the room to make sure nothing had been left behind. Kelly dropped off the room key, then looked around to make sure no one she knew saw her. The only person she spotted was a rather odd-looking man in an outdated gray business suit on the corner looking at her. He seemed somewhat familiar, but she couldn't quite place him. He held a cigarette in one hand and the other was in his pocket. What struck her, however, was the lack of any natural color. He looked like a character straight out of an old black-and-white 1960s television show. She made her way back to her car, got in, and noticed the interior was covered with dust and smelled musty, as though it had sat idle for an extended period of time. Odd. It wasn't like this just a few hours ago, she thought. She rolled down the window to air it out and tried to start the car. At first it wouldn't start, but after pressing the gas pedal several times, it sputtered to life, black smoke pouring out of the exhaust. She pressed the gas pedal several times to make sure the car would run, making a mental note to have her husband look at it in the morning. She headed home, wondering if Kurt would spot any change in her. Hopefully, he wouldn't even notice. She got home a few minutes before 10 West and saw 2 strange cars in her driveway. That's odd, she thought. Kurt didn't say anything about having company over. The house looked a bit different to her as well. The curtains were all wrong and the landscaping had been completely changed. Surely Kurt didn't do all this in one day, and certainly not without consulting her first, she thought. She double-checked the address to make sure she was at the right house, then parked on the street. Kurt had some explaining to do, she said to herself. She got out of the car and went into the house, noticing that everything was wrong. There was strange furniture in the living room. All of her pictures and precious knickknacks were gone, replaced. And worse yet, there was a somewhat older black couple sitting on the couch, looking at her strangely. "Who are you people, and why are you in my house?" Kelly asked. The man stood up and looked at Kelly strangely. "I'm Al Jorgensen," he said. "And this is my wife, Amanda," he added, pointing to the attractive woman sitting with him. "Who might you be, miss? And why are you in our home?" "My name is Kelly Anderson, and I've lived in this house with my husband, Kurt, for the last 8 years," she said. "I don't understand. What's going on?" "Miss, I think you might want to leave now," Al said. "We bought this house from Mr. Anderson a year ago, after his divorce became final." "Divorce?" Kelly asked, shocked. "What divorce? I was here just this morning with my husband before I left for work." Al started to move toward Kelly. "Miss, I think you'd better leave before I call the police." "Yes, please, call the police," Kelly said. "Something's going on here, and I intend to get to the bottom of it. This has got to be one of Kurt's practical jokes." Al picked up the phone and dialed 911. After talking to the dispatcher, he hung up and turned to Kelly. "The police will be here in a few minutes," he said. "You may have a seat if you wish to wait for them here," he added, motioning for her to sit in a recliner next to the couch. Kelly sat down, wondering what she would do next. She pulled out her smartphone and suddenly realized it was dead. This, too, was odd, as she always kept it charged up so Kurt or her children could contact her at any time. "I'm sorry to trouble you, but may I please use your phone so I can call my husband?" Kelly asked. "Sure. No problem at all," Al said, handing her his phone. Kelly dialed Kurt's number from memory, but got a message telling her the number was no longer in use. Frantic, she tried calling her parents' number but got the same response. She also tried calling Kurt's parents but got a fast, busy signal. Dejected and out of options, she handed the phone back to Al. "You say you bought this house a year ago from my husband?" she asked Al. He nodded. "Yes, we did," he said. "He sold it to us at a very good price and said it was due to a divorce." "Did he say anything about why he was getting divorced?" she asked. Amanda spoke up. "He mentioned something about a cheating wife," she said, looking at Kelly suspiciously. Kelly was shocked. How could he know so soon after her first tryst with Scott? Poor guy. I could tell he was heartbroken, and those poor kids. I felt so sorry for them. By now, Kelly was in tears. Her life and marriage had crashed and burned, and she didn't even know it. Shortly thereafter, a police cruiser pulled in front of the house, its lights flashing. 2 police officers appeared at the door. Al spoke to them first, then invited them inside. Kelly stood as they came inside. "Please show us some identification, miss," one officer said. Kelly opened her purse and pulled out her driver's license. The officer looked at it, then spoke to Kelly. "Is this some kind of a joke, ma'am?" he asked. "This license is blank." "What?" Kelly asked, looking at the driver's license. The laminated card the officer held was completely blank. There wasn't even a photo under the lamination. "Do you have some other form of ID?" the officer asked. "I've got something in my purse," Kelly said. But when Kelly opened her purse, she found that all of her other cards were completely blank. "I don't understand," she said. "There should be credit cards, an ATM card, my Social Security card, but they're all blank." "Can you at least give us your name?" the other officer asked. "Maybe there's something in the system." "Sure," Kelly said. "My name is Kelly Anderson, and I live at W. Highland Park Road with my husband, Kurt. I work as a paralegal for the Jenkins law firm downtown. Surely someone there can vouch for me." The officers looked at each other with frowns on their faces before addressing Kelly again. "Did you say Kelly Anderson, ma'am?" the second officer asked. "Yes. I said Kelly Anderson." "I'm sorry, ma'am, you're going to have to come to the station with us so we can verify your identity," the first officer said. "We apologize for the intrusion on your evening, folks," he told Al and Amanda. The officers led Kelly to the police cruiser and placed her in the back seat. After securing her inside, one officer went to Kelly's car and dug through her glove compartment, pulling out some paperwork. They rode in silence to the police station, and Kelly was fingerprinted and taken to what appeared to be an interrogation room. The door opened a half-hour later, and a plainclothes detective entered the room with a folder. He sat down across from Kelly and placed the folder in front of him. He went through all the preliminaries, advising her of her rights while ensuring her that she is not a suspect in any crime. "All I want to do is verify your identity, okay?" he asked. Kelly nodded. "You say your name is Kelly Anderson, right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "And you told our officers that you reside at 1501 W Highland Park Road with your husband Kurt," he added. "That's correct," she said. "You also said that you work at the Jenkins law firm as a paralegal, correct?" he asked. "Yes, that's right," Kelly said. "We have a bit of a problem here, Mrs. Anderson," the detective said. "For starters, your fingerprints don't exist. I don't mean they're not in the system. I mean you have no prints on your fingers. They don't even appear to have removed by acid. They just don't exist. There's more. We looked at the records for that address and found that it was purchased by Al and Amanda Jorgensen a year ago from a Kurt Anderson. According to court records, the house was sold as part of a divorce settlement between Kurt and Kelly Anderson," he said. Kelly was shocked. What was all this talk about? A divorce. "But I'm still married to my husband. I just saw him this morning. I don't understand how this is possible," she said through her tears. "Look, miss, I'm just going by what's on record with the court. Tell me, please, where were you earlier this evening?" the detective asked. "I was at the Gaslight Motel, room 117, she said quietly. "And what were you doing there?" he asked. "I was, with a man," she said, looking down at the floor. "What were you doing with this man?" the detective asked. "We were, fooling around," she said. "You made love, didn't you?" he asked. Kelly nodded her head. "Yes," she said. "And can you identify the man you were with?" "Yes," she said. "Scott Hawkins, my supervisor at the law firm." "I see," the detective said. "Do you make it a habit of cheating on your husband?" Kelly looked shocked. "No, I don't. This was the first and the last time, I promise," she said. "Interesting," the detective said. "The file we have on you includes a very thorough report from a local private investigator your ex-husband hired. According to the PI report, you were spotted with Mr. Hawkins many times at that same motel over a period of several months. Would you like to revise your statement?" Kelly shook her head. "No, that's not right," she said. "I only went there with him the one time. Today." The detective sighed and sat back in his chair, looking at Kelly. "Miss, I happen to know the senior partners at Jenkins. I made a call this evening and was told that a Kelly Anderson and her supervisor, one Scott Hawkins, was terminated almost a year ago for violating the company's rules against fraternization," he said. "But that's not all." He pulled a photo out of the folder and placed it on the table in front of her. The photo showed a woman laying on a motel bed, her eyes open, her face gray. The woman looked just like Kelly, and worse yet, was dressed in exactly the same outfit Kelly was wearing. Her eyes got wide and her hand went to her mouth in shock. "This photo was taken about 3 months ago, miss," the detective said. "According to the officers who responded to the call, one Kelly Anderson, residing at 1501 W Highland Park Road, was found dead in room 117 of the Gaslight Motel 3 months ago. An autopsy revealed that Mrs. Anderson died as a result of an overdose of sleeping pills, apparently taken with copious amounts of alcohol." "So, miss, can you please explain to me how it is that a woman who happens to look and dress exactly like a woman who was found dead in a motel room 3 months ago is now walking around in my precinct?" he asked. "And how is it that you just happened to be in the exact same room this woman died in?" Kelly shook her head in shock. "No, that can't be," she cried. "I'm not dead. I'm right here. I don't know what's going on. Please believe me. At least tell me where my family is, please. I can't get in touch with anyone." "Well, miss, I don't know where Mr. Anderson is, but I understand he moved out of town after the divorce. I do know his former in-laws died shortly after Mrs. Anderson's body was found." "Oh my God, no. Please, please tell me my parents are still alive," she begged through her tears. "I'm sorry. If you truly are the former Mrs. Anderson, and I'm not ready to concede that point, then I can't honestly tell you that," she said, sending Kelly into hysterics. "Miss, I think you need professional help. I'm going to call the county behavioral center and have you transported to their facility until we can get to the bottom of this," he said, pulling out his phone. Kelly shook her head. "No, please don't do that. I don't know what's going on. You have to believe me. Just let me talk to my husband." "I can't do that, ma'am. I don't even know who you really are. You look like the late Mrs. Anderson. You dress like her. You seem to know some of the intimate details of Mrs. Anderson's life. You even drove Mrs. Anderson's car, although I'm not sure how you got it started after it sat for so long. By the way, the tags on that car expired some time ago, so we're impounding it until you can prove ownership and update the registration. Right now, I think you need to discuss this with a mental health professional. Please stay right here," he said as he walked out the door. Kelly put her head on the table, sobbing. This wasn't supposed to happen, she thought. Surely her husband would come rescue her. The door opened, and 2 large men came in the room with a strange garment. As they began putting it on her, Kelly realized she was being placed in a straitjacket and began struggling. "No, no, please don't do this to me," she said. "No! No! No! No!" she screamed over and over, but the men kept putting the garment on her until she could no longer move her arms. "No!" she screamed as one of the men injected something into her neck. Within seconds, her world dissolved into blackness. Thursday, May 12th, 2016, 11:30 p.m. "Wake up, darling," said a male voice. "Wake up. Are you okay? Kelly, wake up." Kelly slowly opened her eyes and saw her husband's face. "Kelly, you were having a nightmare, but it's over. Wake up, honey," he said. As Kelly's mind slowly shook off the dream, she realized that she was in her bed with her husband, Kyle. She instantly threw her arms around his neck and smothered his face with kisses. "Oh my God, Kurt, is it really you?" she asked. "Of course, silly. Who else would be in our bed?" he asked. "Hold me, Kurt. Please," she cried. "I missed you so much." Kurt held his crying wife as tight as he could. He loved holding this beautiful woman. But, he wondered, what the hell was she talking about? "I'm right here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." "You better not go anywhere," she said. After calming down somewhat, Kelly looked at her husband. "Kurt," she said, "I have a confession to make, and I'm afraid you may get really mad at me." He looked at her with concern. "Kurt, I almost made a terrible mistake," she said. "Almost?" he asked. "Kurt, please don't hate me. But I have to tell you this. You know we promised to never keep any secrets from each other no matter how bad they might be." "Yes, dear, I know. You can talk to me about anything. You know that, right?" he asked. Kelly nodded. "Yes, I know, but this is really bad. You know my supervisor, Scott Hawkins?" Kurt knew him all right. They met at the law firm's Christmas party, and Kurt could tell he was a first-class asshole who considered himself God's gift to the female of the species. Basically, a legend in his own mind. He could also tell that Scott was trying to get his hooks and his private parts into Kelly. Yeah, I remember him all right, Kurt said. He's been after me for the longest time to stay after work, except he doesn't want to work, if you know what I mean, she said. You mean he wants to get into your panties, Kurt said. I can understand that. You're a beautiful woman. What man in his right mind wouldn't want to make love to you? If we weren't married, I'd be all over you myself. What I don't like is that he knows you're married. Yes, but he wanted me to meet him at the motel for love, she said, lowering her gaze. Oh, really? Kurt said, his mood darkening. And you agreed? No, not really, she said. But I didn't really disagree either. I just kind of blew him off. But he's expecting me to meet him tomorrow. I can't do that, but I'm afraid it'll affect my job if I don't. Well, I can assure you it'll affect our marriage if you do. And yes, it could affect your job as well, Kurt said. You know I won't tolerate infidelity, and your company has strict rules against fraternization. Both of you could get fired, and yes, I would seek a divorce. I know, she said. I haven't done anything with him yet, but I'm afraid. I know he's been with a lot of the other girls in the office, and they all say he's a smooth talker who isn't above using drugs to get his way. You do believe me, don't you? Of course I believe you, Kurt said. You forget that we've been married for 10 years, and we've known each other for 5 years before that. You've never been able to keep a secret from me, and the guilt would eat you alive. While we're on the subject, I've noticed that you've been a bit off the last couple days. At first I thought it was just work-related, but now I think I know the real reason, don't I? Kelly looked down and nodded her head. Yes, she said quietly. It's been on my mind a lot these last 2 days. I don't want to lose my job, but I couldn't live without you, and I couldn't live with myself if I hurt you and the kids like that. What do I do? You're kidding, right? Kurt asked. You're a smart, educated woman, Karen. Do you really have to ask? Or do you want me to lay it out for you? You don't need to do that, Kurt. I guess I just needed some validation. I know the first thing I'm doing, she said, getting out of the bed. She walked to her closet and pulled out the dress she intended to wear the next day. It was a nice dress that showed a bit of cleavage and fell a few inches above her knees. It wasn't overtly sexual, but it still did a good job of highlighting her curves. She pulled it off the hanger and tossed it into the trash. I never want to see that dress again, she said. Kurt looked surprised. That was a pretty expensive dress, he said. Are you sure you want to do that? Kelly sat down on the bed. Yes, she said. And tomorrow I'm telling Scott not just no, but hell no. Then I'm going to ask for a transfer to another department. I may get a cut in pay, but I don't care. If they won't give it to me, I'll quit. Our marriage is more important to me, and I'll do anything to keep us together. Can you ever forgive me? Of course I can, Kurt said. I'm a bit pissed that you didn't tell that creep no right off the bat, but at least you're doing the right thing now. Kelly hugged her husband as though her life depended on it. I can't believe I was so stupid, Kurt. Please hold me and tell me you love me, she said. Kurt hugged her back and kissed her forehead. Of course I love you, Kelly. I always have, he said. But I think we need to have a serious talk about this after you've settled down. Maybe even seek some counseling. I can't believe you were so gullible that you were falling for him like that. I understand, Kelly said. I promise it'll never happen again. She looked at the television on the wall opposite their bed and saw him. The man she saw on the street corner in her nightmare. Kurt, who is that man on TV? She asked. That's Rod Serling, dear. They're having a Twilight Zone marathon. Why? I've seen him before but didn't know who he was, she said. How is that possible? He died back in 1975, Kurt said. He was in my nightmare. He didn't do anything really, he just stood there and looked. He was in black and white just like on the TV and it was just, I don't know, weird, she said. Interesting, Kurt said. You're going to have to tell me about this dream someday. Kurt got out of the bed and started for the door. I'm going downstairs to get myself something to drink. Do you want anything? Coke? Water? I'd like some water, please, she said. After Kurt left the bedroom, Kelly looked back at the black and white figure on their television. The man looked as though he was staring right back at her before he spoke. "Meet Kelly Anderson," he said, getting Kelly full attention. What the hell? A smart, attractive wife and mother targeted for seduction by a slick-talking Lothario with more conquests than Genghis Khan. She nearly threw her marriage and her life into the abyss in hopes of achieving the ultimate pleasure. Fortunately, she learned the grass is not always greener on the other side and made a U-turn just in time, but not before taking a precipitous detour into the cheating zone. He smiled, winked, and took a drag off of his cigarette. Fade to black. Subscribe to our channel to keep your partner from cheating on you, and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next.